You've got a keyboard and it probably sounds like this. Or this. But you've got a problem. It needs to be quieter. Maybe you're streaming, late night gaming, or just annoying the heck out of your co-workers. There are loads of reasons to get quiet switches for your keyboard. I'm going to be taking a look at Gamakay's lineup of silent switches. Gamakay sent me their Phoenix, Pegasus, and Griffin switches to look at. Both Pegasus and Griffin switches are tactile, with the Phoenix being a linear switch. First thing I notice when I look at these switches is the quality of the packaging. It might not matter to everyone, but I do like nicely packaged switches, as it's far too often even premium switches don't have the proper packaging. Now, I will be comparing all three switches against each other, but first let's take a look at each switch individually. First up, we have the Pegasus switch. These are blue and grey themed tactile switches. I wanted to start with these because they're my favourite, simply because they feel the most tactile. Tactile switches are often louder than linear, so these being nice and quiet is quite impressive. But don't just take my word for it, here is a quick comparison versus Acco Lavender Purples and Jwick T1 switches. As you can hear, the Pegasus switch being a silent switch is a lot quieter, however it still retains its tactile feel. As to the specifications of the switch, it has a 60g tactile force, 2mm of pre-travel, and 3.3mm of travel distance. These switches do come pre-lubed as well, which is nice to see. All three of these switches have space for LEDs to shine through. The Phoenix and Pegasus switches also have a clear top housing, letting light through without affecting the colour. Another similarity between these switches is that they all have rails down the stem and a dust-proof top, which should all help with stability. Next up is the Griffin switch. It too is a tactile and very similar to the Pegasus switch in its specifications, only differing in travel distance and pre-travel, both being a little less, 3.2mm for travel distance and having 1.8mm of pre-travel. As to the looks, it is a little different to the other two, including a clear but coloured brown top housing, which will of course slightly affect the colour of the RGB more than the other two with the clear top housings, which should let light through in its natural colours. I know RGB is important to some of you guys, so here's a quick comparison between the two switches to show how much the brown top housing will affect the colour. Lastly, the third out of these three switches is the Phoenix switch. It's red and yellow themed, and although the Pegasus switch is my favourite for its tactile feel yet quiet sound, the Phoenix is my favourite switch out of the three in terms of colour, as the red and yellow make it stand out, as they're both bold contrasting colours. It's a silent linear switch, and if it's at all like the other two, should be quite a bit quieter than your standard switch, so let's compare it to a typical red switch and a KTT Kang White, all three being linear switches. In specifications, this is a little different to the Pegasus and Griffin switches, and on the box it does give a complete comparison between these three switches, which you guys can pause and compare the three to see which is best for you. Now what they can't show you on the box is the difference in sound between all three, and although they each feel different, you're most likely choosing these because they're quieter than your average switch. So let's see how these sound compared directly to each other. I will be doing a full typing test with each of these switches, but before that I wanted to open up each switch to show you guys what they consist of and how they are designed. Just looking at the base of these switches, they are a 3-pin switch, which doesn't bother me, but it does mean they will have slightly less stability than their 5-pin alternatives. I went to use a switch opener, and unfortunately these are very fractionally too large, which is disappointing if you're planning to lube a large number of these, as it will make the job a bit more fiddly. So instead, I just used my trusty tweezers. These being slightly larger than your standard switch does mean they're quite a tight fit for all the keyboards I tested them in. They do fit, just keep in mind if your standard size switches are already a tight fit, you may have difficulty with these switches. Opening up the Pegasus switch, we can see there's a light amount of lube applied from the factory, but this is a very light coating and you might want to consider hand lubing these. Just do be careful, as lubing the rubber rails can cause issues if done wrong. That being said, it certainly isn't required, as they're really smooth stock. Looking at the stem, there is a different material used for the rails, most likely some form of rubber, to help stop the loud sound of plastic on plastic. Sadly, I can't find any information on what these switches are made out of, but if I find any information after the video is uploaded, I'll link it down below. I've opened up each switch, and as far as I can see, that's pretty much it. All the switches have the same construction, with the rubber rails to help reduce the contact noise. I'll put the switches back together and throw them into my Gas 67, so you guys can hear a proper sound test. But just before that, I wanted to say that I will have links down below in the description for any of you who are interested in picking some of these up, and Gamakay have been kind enough to include a 5% discount if you use the code SHIFTY5. Thank you guys so much for watching, and let me know of your thoughts on these switches and silent switches in general. It'd be great to hear from you, and I'll see you guys in the next one.